doing his world traveler thing. So I can't remember what order the cities or the countries are, but he's going to be in Sweden, Belgium, France, and Italy until the end of the month. So I hope we get a few dispatches from the front lines. I did have an email from him saying they'd arrived safely and were doing what they needed to do. And if you've seen Yuko's Facebook page, you've seen a picture of the lovely B&B they're staying in. So we'll keep track of them on their travels. So as for us, here we are in the Zendo. And as you might expect, taking up another gate of the 108 Gates of Dharma Illumination, which appears in the 12 Fascal version of Dogen's Shogo Genzo. And as you know, I usually talk about this text. Today I want to take up gate number 12. Mindfulness of Precepts is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we fulfill all vows. So according to this text, keeping precepts is how we carry out our bodhisattva vows, whether we've formally taken some kind of vows or we've just cultivated an internal aspiration to be a bodhisattva in the world. Keeping precepts is an important way that we do that. So first let's understand what precepts are about. Then let's look at how precepts and vows are related, because these things are actually not separate. So just in general usage, a precept is a guideline for ethical behavior, right? It's some kind of instruction about actions we take. So this is not about an intellectual exercise. Precepts are about what are we actually doing with this body and mind. And as we know, I mean, our whole practice is about what are we actually doing with this body and mind. So again, just to review, the 10 major precepts: do not kill, do not steal, do not engage in improper sexual conduct, do not lie, do not deal in intoxicants, do not criticize others, do not praise self and slander others, do not be stingy with the Dharma or property, do not give way to anger, and do not disparage the 3 treasures. So these are the 10 grave precepts, or 10 major precepts in our tradition. There is a difference in the basis of the precepts between our tradition and others. So in the Theravadan tradition, you may know, there are hundreds and hundreds, perhaps, of precepts, especially if you're female and ordained. There are 300 and some precepts. Fortunately, nobody made me take 348 precepts or some such thing. So there's a difference between that tradition, where there are many, 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 many precepts, and our Soto Zen tradition, where we have these 10 grave precepts. And if you've taken precepts as a layperson or an ordained person, you know you also do a few other things, so it's a total of 16. So in our tradition, we say that these precepts existed before Buddha's awakening, that these did not originate with Buddha's teaching. Historically, as Hodo-san has explained, that's actually not true. Once the early Sangha was established, and people started flocking around the Buddha and learning from him and becoming his students and becoming a community, people made mistakes, because people are human, right? Just as we make mistakes. We can see the real humanity of those early practitioners because we see that they made mistakes. When they did, Buddha looked around and said, that's not so good, don't do that anymore. That's not a helpful action, or that's harmful to others or something, it's a bad idea, don't do it anymore. And as that sort of got codified, we ended up with a series of rules. So those guidelines range from broad things like don't kill people and don't take stuff, right, to really specific rules like what color your blanket had to be. Or you can't have women who are unrelated to you washing your clothes or mending or making your clothes. You can't have a new bowl until your old one's been patched 5 times, right? So there's really specific stuff, which we don't see in the 10 precepts that we take in this tradition. So somehow Buddha's disciple Upali memorized all of these admonitions, all the stories of how they happened, and at the big meeting that all the monks had after the Buddha died, he recited all these things so that they became recorded. And this is the source of the Vinaya precepts, the really early guidelines. So there were no regulations, no precepts at that point until monks made mistakes and Buddha said, don't do that anymore. So even though they tried to practice and follow Buddha's teaching and follow Buddha's way, of course things happened because they're human. So the basic idea of the Bodhisattva precepts that we take is somewhat different because these are not a collection of prohibitions about mistakes. These precepts describe reality. So they are 10 sort of ethical aspects of the Dharma, or ethical aspects of reality. So in that way, they predate the Buddha, right? Because this is how the universe worked, and the universe was around before Siddhartha sat down under the tree. So these are descriptions of reality rather than responses to mistakes. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So Buddha always said he didn't invent the Dharma, right? It was something to which he awakened under the tree. It was not something that originated with him. The Dharma was there before him. So these precepts come into being at the time of Buddha's awakening because he has awakened to the way the universe works. So Dogen Zenji says in the very beginning of his Kyoju Kaimon, comments on teaching and conferring the precepts, receiving the precepts transcends the borders of past, present, and future. And that makes sense, right? If we consider that these precepts are a description of reality, then there is no past, present, and future. There is no, at some time things were perfect and then somebody made a mistake and now there's a guideline, right? So the basis of the Bodhisattva precepts is the reality of all beings to which the Buddha awakened under his tree, which is characterized by impermanence and egolessness and interdependence, right? So these things are already there. So because everything is impermanent, including this self, we can't cling to anything, right? If we can't grasp anything, if we can't cling to anything because everything is constantly changing, then right away we are liberated from attachment to self, attachment to possessions, attachment to ideas, right? Because everything's already changing. So liberation is already there. So stealing, for instance, doesn't make sense because there's nothing that I can say, well, this is mine, it's going to be mine forever and ever, or this is yours and somehow it's going to become mine, right? It just doesn't make sense. There's no basis for that. So if there's no basis for that, then there's no felt need to steal stuff. If we understand how things really are, there is no stealing, right? Because there's nothing to steal and nothing to be taken and nobody doing the taking, right? So, there's nothing that's really permanently ours. So if there's no self that persists through time, then it also doesn't make sense, for instance, to indulge our personal anger in some effort to shore up this self. If you do something and I become angry at you, somehow that makes me better, makes me right? I have a right to be angry. What am I doing? I'm shoring up this self. And yet there is no self that persists through time. So what am I doing? Right? There's no basis, really, in reality, for me to try to defend something here and to indulge in my anger. So because everything is interconnected, everything we know arises from something else, nothing arises from nothing. So there are causes and conditions, and something arises. So we can only exist in relationship with other things and with other people. So that means if we harm other beings, we harm ourselves. If we really deeply get that, if we really deeply understand that, this compulsion, this urge to do harm to others doesn't arise. It doesn't make sense. It just, there's no basis for that anymore. So now we begin to see this relationship, right, between keeping the precepts and carrying out vows. Mindfulness of precepts is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we fulfill all vows. Right? You start to see this connection. So the Bodhisattva vows we're very familiar with here. We chant them after every Dharma talk. We vow to free all beings. We vow to end all delusions. We vow to enter all the Dharma gates and to realize or make real the Buddha way. So when we first encounter precepts in this practice, they might feel restrictive. There's a bunch of stuff we can't do or we're not supposed to do. Or we're feeling maybe hemmed in by those guidelines. They're all about what we're not supposed to do. But actually, precepts bring freedom. Precepts bring liberation. When we keep precepts, we don't keep churning up our stuff. We don't keep getting caught up in our delusion, our anger, our greed, our ignorance. We don't keep adding to our harmful karma and perpetuating that stuff onto other people so it comes back to us. So if we just act in alignment with reality, if we keep precepts, if we live and act in a wholesome way, there's liberation already right there. So we're no longer slaves to our thirsting desire and our craving and aversion and all that stuff, right? So we can say in that way that precepts, keeping the precepts, liberates all beings, and if nothing else, they're liberated from our unskillful behavior, right? At least if I'm not out in the world doing unskillful things, people are liberated from the kind of suffering that can perpetuate. But because of interdependence, our own liberation is also the liberation of others, just because we're all in this together, right? We're all in the same boat. There's no getting outside of the Buddha way. There's no getting outside of our connections with each other. So how can it not be true that if we harm others, we harm ourselves? And that if we do good for others, we're also helping ourselves. We're all in this together within this one unified reality, so there's kind of no escape, right? If I'm creating safe and wholesome and peaceful circumstances in the world by observing precepts, then I'm creating the conditions for other beings to settle, right? To cultivate wisdom and ethics and compassion. I'm creating a container. I'm helping to create the container, or at least I'm not chipping away at the container for other beings to do what they have to do toward their own liberation. Maybe I'm not actively, pointing out the Dharma to somebody, but you know how it is when you sit with people or you surround yourself with a community that has a like aspiration to you. There's a real support there. There's something about that container which assists everybody. We just had Sesshin here, right? About a dozen people, literally from all over the world. All over this country, somebody from Argentina, somebody from Italy, people who didn't know each other. For some people, it was their first Sesshin. For some people, it was their first experience of Sanshin. Really a diverse community. Within half a day, we were all sitting together. Everybody knew what the forms were. Everybody knew how things worked. We created our usual pop-up community. Sesshin is always a pop-up community here. Right? Right away, something happened here, and people were able to support each other simply by showing up on time, following the forms so nobody stepped in front of anybody. Everybody knew how to get in and out of the zendo. We all took our turns cleaning up after the meals. Something happens there which creates a container. And the comments at the end of this session are things like, I really got to settle down, right? I really got to deeply settle into my practice because here was this container which we co-created, which is not available to us in our daily lives. When we go home, nobody's watching the clock for us, probably. Nobody's ringing a bell to tell us get up or eat a meal or come back to the zendo and sit down or get up and walk around. This is something that happens because people come together to support each other. So that kind of circumstance is a microcosm, right, of this kind of interdependence. We're all following precepts. We're all making life a bit easier for each other. We're all helping everybody to practice. We're all carrying out vows, whether we've sort of formally taken those or not. So if instead of that kind of container, I'm doing whatever I want in the world based on my own kind of craving and aversion and selfish, self-centeredness, self-involvedness, my three poisonous minds of greed, anger, ignorance, nobody's going to feel safe around me. Nobody's going to settle, right? We've probably all encountered people at some point in our lives that they're not restful people. And therefore, we're not restful, There's something that gets transmitted there. Maybe we're not afraid for our personal safety, but there's just some unsettledness there. Sometimes if we're aware enough, we can have some compassion for that person and not get kind of drawn into that. But sometimes you meet people, or you have to work with people, or you encounter people somehow, and there's just this unsettledness, there's just this restlessness, and you notice it in your own body. You can't settle down, or you're distracted by that, or you're tempted to fall off the path a little bit, do something a little bit unskillful. So if that's me, and I'm the person who's going through the world in an unwholesome, unskillful way, breaking precepts, not paying attention, nobody around me is going to settle down. Nobody around me is going to be able to see clearly what's going on for themselves, what's going on around them. We're likely to get caught up in some kind of equally unskillful behavior and perpetuate some suffering. I'm going to do something, someone's going to respond to me. Whether that's conscious or not, right? So how can we go through the world being a little island for people? Not in a precious way, not in an evangelizing way, just if I go through the world carrying precepts, doing my practice, paying attention, other people will settle. This probably happened to you. Maybe when you started this practice, after a while your family or your friends came to you and said, I don't know what's going on with you, but like something's happened. For the better, right? Somehow you're more settled. Somehow you have some equanimity, right? And maybe you explain to them what you're doing and maybe you don't. But it's really interesting how this transformation starts to happen for us and how we carry it into the world. We can't help it because it's who we are. So we can begin to free all beings by bearing in mind precepts. And there's the first vow, right? So in the same way, precepts can help us recognize and dissolve our delusion because they describe reality as it is, rather than the reality we create up here. The reality that comes out of our self-centeredness and our craving and desire. Because those precepts are about what's really going on. So if we pay attention to our use of intoxicants, whether that's drugs, alcohol, shopping, other people, whatever we use to intoxicate ourselves, we begin to clear the clouds a little bit. If we don't give way to anger, if instead we can remain kind of clear-headed, clear-eyed, we can see what's really happening, how we're being triggered, how we're responding to that trigger, how we're clinging to delusions about self, we start to get a little clarity there. So, of course, this is where our zazen comes in, and how our zazen is related to this whole thing. So zazen and the precepts are not separate, right? They're complementary, really, in our practice. We need the precepts in order to settle down and cultivate awakening and cultivate insight. Because if we're out there doing crazy stuff, causing harm to ourselves and others, and then we try to get on the cushion, it doesn't work well, does it? If we, I was just talking to somebody the other day who was feeling unsettled about something she'd done in the past, and somehow unable to let go of that, feeling some guilt. Even though, as far as she could tell, things were really okay, but she's clinging to this thing, right? So how can she settle down in zazen? Because this is here. Now, she made a mistake. She admits she made a mistake. She's tried to make amends for the mistake. Nobody got hurt. Everything's okay. But still, somehow there it is, right? If instead, we live in a wholesome way, we try to live in alignment with reality, we pay attention to precepts, it's much easier to settle down in zazen. Once we settle down in zazen and cultivate some insight, it's all for the good. It's a spiral all for the good, right? So instead, if we're running around being pulled by karma, pulled by our delusions, pulled by our mistakes, we're not creating conditions for becoming quiet, are we? Or seeing clearly. So Hojo-san says, our zazen and the precepts are one. In our zazen practice, we put our entire being on the ground of true reality of all beings, instead of the picture of the world that is a creation of our minds. By striving to keep the precepts in our daily lives, we strive to live being guided by our zazen. It becomes more possible, right, for us to take zazen mind off the cushion into the world, if we're not unsettling ourselves by breaking precepts. So precepts describe reality, and zazen is also about seeing reality. So these two things are connected. We can begin to end our inexhaustible delusions, right, by bearing in mind the precepts. So next, the precepts help us recognize all the Dharma gates we encounter as we move through the world, which is the third of our bodhisattva vows. So once we take the focus off of ourselves, and we remember that we're part of a much larger interconnected system, then we start to notice all the opportunities we have to practice. And there are many, right? We can turn every one of those precepts around from a prohibition, don't do this, to a positive action that says, here's what we ought to be doing, or here's what we can be doing. Right there we can see all the Dharma gates we can enter just by looking at precepts and turning those around, right? So when I think this is a Western thing, I could be wrong, but I think this is a Western thing. There is actually, not a text, but there's some writing about how we can turn these things around. When we do that, they're called the clear mind precepts, as opposed to the prohibitory precepts or the grave precepts. If we turn them around, people call those the clear mind precepts. So instead of killing, we can protect and cultivate and encourage life. So we can take that first precept that says don't kill. That's the don't do. What do we do? Protect, cultivate, encourage life. Instead of stealing, we can give generously and honor the gift not yet given. right? So even if we're not in a position to actively give something, at least we can honor those things that haven't been given to us and not take them, right? So instead of misusing sexuality, we can respect others. We can remain faithful in our relationships. We can actively do something positive. Instead of false speech, we can communicate truth to the best of our ability and in a compassionate way, right? Sometimes the best thing to do is not to say anything. Or at least in that moment. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Right? But we can do the best we can to be clear and to be true and to communicate truth. Instead of misusing intoxicants, we can stay clear. We can polish clarity for ourselves and others. We can work on seeing and dispelling our delusion and seeing through all that stuff. At best, we can avoid intoxicating ourselves with all the things we use to intoxicate ourselves. Chocolate, right? Too much exercise, whatever we do. And we can actively work to dispel delusion. Instead of speaking ill of others or dwelling on past mistakes, ours or other people's past mistakes, we can speak kindly, right? We can sort of turn wisdom into ignorance. How can we speak in a way which is helpful for people? Doesn't criticize, doesn't mean we can't give useful feedback. Sometimes we need to do that. But what's our motivation there, and what's our intention and our aspiration around that? Can we speak kindly? Instead of praising ourselves and blaming others, we can maintain some kind of modesty. We can point out when others are doing well, or when we're grateful to other people. Because, it's so easy to get caught up in the ego. For me, you probably know, I've mentioned before, my internal dialogue, we've all got an internal dialogue during Zazen, and we watch the same thing come up over and over, and where do we get stuck? Mine is all about public competence, or not being publicly incompetent. So I have to be careful about this, praising self or blaming others, because we can do that in such a subtle way. Humble bragging. When I first heard that word, I thought, that's really interesting, humble bragging. I'm going to make myself appear to be so humble, but, it's because I'm, my favorite thing in a job interview, they say, well, now they would say, what do you do well? What's your good points? And then they say, and what's something about you that's not so good? And people say, well, I just never get around to taking vacation because I work so hard. Humble bragging, yes, indeed. Instead of begrudging the Dharma or materials, we can share our understanding. We can freely give what we have and what we know. And to not begrudge the Dharma doesn't mean you coerce people into coming and sitting Zazen with you. Not begrudging the Dharma is simply to be aware of what other people need and try to help with that. That means I don't give what I would need. I have to give what that person would need, which might be very different than what I would need in that circumstance. Maybe you've been in a circumstance where somebody has tried to help you and offered you something, but you know what they're offering is not what you need. It's what they would want. And it's hard because you want to be grateful that they're trying to help you, but this thing is just not what you need right now. I don't want to talk about my stuff. I just want to be quiet while the person opposite you, if they're in trouble, they really want, what do you do? So I think we have to be careful when we're the ones offering the Dharma. And all of us offer the Dharma, whether we're teachers or not, wearing a raksa or not, doesn't matter, right? We're walking through the world offering the Dharma because that's what we do. We're living this practice. So how do we offer the Dharma in a skillful way? Instead of harboring anger or ill will, we can dwell in equanimity. We can try to have some balance. We can try to be forgiving. We can try to cultivate some kindness. So if I feel anger, ill will coming up in me, can I stop and say, is that really what I want to put in the world? Or can I turn it around? Can I instead take a clear-minded precepts approach and turn that around and say, well, can I cultivate some forgiveness? Can I at least stay balanced and not do something I'm going to regret later on? Or where I'm going to have to go back and clean up the mess. Finally, instead of abusing the three treasures, we can respect the Buddha. We can unfold the Dharma. We can nourish the Sangha. Right? We can take care of those three treasures. Just taking care of the three treasures is a whole lifetime practice in itself, right? Simply studying what the Buddha taught. Taking care of our Sangha friends. So you see how precepts can become, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, or we can turn them around and say, what do we actively do instead? which is the other half of the equation. It's kind of not enough just to not do bad stuff. We've also got to do the good stuff. It's not enough just keep unwholesome states from arising. How do we actually cultivate wholesome states and put those out in the world? That's part of right effort, right? So it's good to refrain from doing those things that the precepts say we shouldn't do. They warn us against. But we can actively go beyond that and actively enter into the Dharma gates that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. So we can begin to find and recognize and enter all those Dharma gates simply by bearing in mind the precepts. So finally, precepts lead us to make the Buddha way real, to realize the Buddha way, right here, right now, moment after moment. So to realize something, in this case, is not, oh, I realize it. I realize it, right? It's real. So Hojo-san says, in order to nurture the seeds, to actualize Buddha, we should strive not to kill. In the same way, the other 9 major precepts all show the virtue of the true reality of all beings. Right? So this is how we manifest true reality, how we make the Buddha way real. Mindfulness of precepts is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we fulfill all vows. So how do we bear the precepts in mind? It's one thing to simply read the precepts and say, yeah, I get it. And then when we go out the door, here or in the morning, what do? How do we carry those things around? So maybe it's simply an internal agreement between myself and Buddha, or between me and me, that says I aspire to live in a certain way, and that I do my best to carry precepts and live in a wholesome way and help others all I can. And that's really fine. There's certainly nothing that says you have to make a public declaration. Maybe your practice is simply a conversation between you and Buddha, or you and you. But maybe you do decide you're going to make a public declaration. You're going to do a Jukai ceremony. You're going to wear a rakusu, like some of us are here. When we put that on, or this, right, we are wearing the Tathagata's teachings. That's what the robe chant says, wearing the Tathagata's teachings. So we're actually putting this on, clothing ourselves with these teachings. I've heard our robes referred to as Dharma armor, right? If we're wearing that stuff, it's pretty hard to forget precepts. There's something that happens in your body. You're wearing the Tathagata's teaching. Good grief. It's kind of hard to forget at that point what we vowed to do, what our aspiration is, which is why these things are helpful. One of the reasons these things are helpful. I know for me, when I first started wearing a rakusu, I could feel, I'd put this thing on my body and go, oh yeah, it's time to practice. Oh yeah, I'm in this place now. We're wearing that rakusu whether we're wearing it or not, but when we put it on and we go through that process, there's something interesting that happens. Just like when we sit zazen, if you sit at home, maybe you always light a candle, maybe you always do an incense. There's a process maybe you go through when you sit, and your body goes, oh yeah, I remember now. Rakusu is kind of like that. These robes, I think, hold us up a bit. They give us some support, as well as being a reminder for ourselves and to others. When people see you wearing a rakusu, something happens for them. You're not just wearing that thing for you. When I was training at Toshoji, and we would have to go out somewhere, maybe we had to go out to do a memorial service, or even we were just traveling somehow to another temple. Roshi said we always had to wear jikitotsu and rakusu. We couldn't travel in casual, like samurai, casual clothes. Because he said when we go looking like this, when people see monks, they can't do anything bad. So this was his way of helping, or just making sure when we were out in the world, we were kind of a force for good, right? Because we're walking around looking like monks. He says, well, people look at monks, they can't do anything bad. We were a physical walking reminder of the precepts. So don't think that when people see you wearing your rakusus, if you have them, that that's not happening for them, right? This is how we bear precepts in mind. One of the ways how we bear precepts in mind. We're liberating other people because we're serving as a reminder. You know, don't break the precepts. Pay attention to what you're doing. So when we take the precepts, we make this kind of public declaration of our intention to live as bodhisattvas and to keep the precepts and to free all beings. So again, maybe we've done that privately ourselves, but maybe we've chosen to do that in a public way. In a way, that's kind of a big deal, isn't it? It requires some real discernment about how we want to live. and what our aim is. So we recognize at that point that our practice is not just for ourselves. Right? So taking the precepts, becoming a public face of the Dharma, if you will, is not just about ourselves. We take the vows to support our practice, and we wear the raksu to support our practice, but also all beings. So it's not just our raksu. We always say these robes don't belong to us. They belong to Buddha. They're just kind of on long-term loan, right? So we've taken vows to free all beings, to end all delusions, to enter all the Dharma gates there are, to realize or make real the Buddha way. Now we're kind of accountable, right, for how we carry that out. We've publicly said, here's what my aspiration is. Now I'm pretty sure, none of us are looking at each other and holding each other kind of personally accountable, but there's some kind of accountability that happens, doesn't it, when we make that sort of public statement. Gosh, I've devoted my life to something now. I'm kind of accountable for that. So Zen is a practice, right? It's something we do. It's not something we study over here in an intellectual way. Gee, that's interesting. For an hour or two on Sunday, I study this thing, and then, that's my hobby. First thing I tell, like my Ivy Tech students, or people who I teach to sit, Zen is a practice. Buddhism is a practice. It's something we do. Because it's really easy in this culture, because it's kind of not mainstream, to say, well, I'm going to, for general knowledge, I'm going to go learn about this Buddhism thing, because it's really not about me. Well, the first thing, of course, we understand is it's all about me. It's all about my action and what I do. So what do we do to carry out our vows? Well, that's the Eightfold Path, right? And that's keeping precepts. There's plenty of advice and direction in this practice about how do we actually carry out this aspiration. Once we've taken these vows, what do we do? Buddha says, the tradition says what we do. So, of course, these things are related as well, right? Eightfold Path, precepts, vows. Within the Eightfold Path, there's the Shila division, the ethics or morality division. Right speech, right action, right livelihood. It's totally not separate from precepts, right? We really have a place to look if we want some advice about how do we carry out precepts in the furtherance of our vows. So, for example, right speech is all about refraining from the four evils, right? It's lying, idle, frivolous speech, harsh, abusive speech, and divisive speech, or backbiting, malicious gossip, that kind of thing, right? That is, abstaining from those four things is what right speech is about. Pretty clearly tied to precepts about not lying, about not disparaging other people, about not giving into ill will, right? So it's all right there. Right action. Right action happens naturally when we see how the world really works. As soon as we understand how things are connected, how this universe actually plays out. We understand suffering, we understand interdependence, we understand the true nature of self, what this self is really about, how these three things are related. When we deeply understand that, there is nothing to learn and no decision to make about what action do I take here. It arises naturally. So we know what we do affects other people, what they do affects us. So there's just no getting around that. Right action is important in that way. We all have a responsibility to take right action because the consequences are bigger than us. Right? There's no kind of, well, I don't feel like taking right action today. We have to. Precepts are all about taking right action because, again, when we really understand how things work, we don't kill, we don't steal, we don't misuse intoxicants, we don't misuse sexuality. The urge to do that doesn't arise. Because it doesn't help anything. We don't have to stop ourselves from doing these things. So these precepts, again, turn around. On their own, they turn around. So it stops being about, well, I have to keep myself from doing this and this and this and this and this. If I'm sitting and I clearly see reality, those things don't arise. So we know the way to fix something, the way to ameliorate our suffering is not by doing something which creates more suffering. So we don't want to do that stuff. So this is why the Bodhisattva precepts existed before Buddha, right? Before Buddha's awakening. The universe was already there. So nobody has to tell us not to kill stuff or not to take stuff because those killing and stealing just don't arise. So the last item in this Shila division of the Eightfold Path, of course, is right livelihood. To me, work is one of the most important practice containers we've got. Where do we spend more time? Where are we more stressed? Where are we more challenged to uphold something? than in the workplace, right? In this day and age, to me, that's a real, it's a practice container. I don't care what you do for a living, or if you're in school, whatever that is for you in your life, that's a real practice container. And, I used to work for the government. I spent a couple decades working for the government, and yet somehow I brought my practice to work. I was careful. It's really careful. You don't bring religion to the government workplace too easily. But you don't leave it at home either, because that's who you are. So there's the work itself we're being paid to do, and we have to give some thought to, does that work move the world toward wholesomeness and toward healing and being skillful, or is it moving the world towards something else? So is the work we're being paid to do based on something unwholesome or something wholesome? Is it based on lying and stealing and killing and abusing others and creating ill will? And if so, we want to think about that. And then there's our own actions in the workplace. Independent of what the work itself is, how are we approaching the work? How are we approaching our coworkers? Are we breaking precepts on our own, even though the work may be wholesome? What's our attitude to the work, right? So we have a couple of things to think about there. So as is true with just about everything else in Buddhism, precepts, vows, Eightfold Path arise together. We really can't pull them apart. It's just multiple ways to look at the same thing. So when we first encounter these bodhisattva vows, of course, the reaction is always, I can't possibly do that. I can't possibly save all beings. I'm just one little beginner practitioner, a baby bodhisattva. I can't possibly save all beings. I can't possibly eliminate all the delusions I have. I can't possibly enter into every single Dharma gate there is. There's supposed to be 84,000 Dharma gates, right? How do we enter into all 84,000 Dharma gates? How do I make real something as infinite as the Buddha way? How do I do that? So always when people are considering taking precepts, there's something in the back of the mind that says, I don't know if I'm worthy. Whenever I've given precepts, there's always at least one person in the group who comes to me outside of the sewing meetings and all this stuff and says, I'm just not so sure about, I'm going to break all these precepts. Yeah, you are. And you take them anyway. At one point, our board of directors here was considering an ethics policy, because we still don't have one. And this was not recent. I proposed an ethics policy because every Dharma center in the country has an ethics policy, and it's kind of a requirement for a lot of stuff. But for one reason or another, we didn't have one here. And some of the board members were willing to consider it, but some were not. And the reason they were not willing to consider an ethics policy was that they thought it was not enforceable. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That never occurred to me. Because I guess I'm used to these bodhisattva vows where you take them anyway. I can't possibly save all beings, but I'm going to vow to do it anyway. I can't possibly enter 84,000 Dharma gates, and I'm going to vow to do it anyway. So we can put out an expectation for ethical action here, and somebody's going to violate it, and we do it anyway. Because we do. It gives us some direction. But, we encounter these vows and we just think it's no use. I'm just not even going to try. I'm not even going to take this up because it's not possible. And of course, that's an early Dharma gate for us, isn't it? Working with that. How do I take on something I can't possibly do? So as Hojo-san frequently tells us, vow and repentance, two sides of the same practice. Or they are the same practice. Because our practice will always be incomplete. So, repentance is not about, I made a mistake, I'm a terrible person. Repentance is about recognizing we will be practicing every moment forever because these vows are huge. And these precepts are huge. And we just have to keep going, doing our best, moment by moment, day by day, which is how we keep precepts and how precepts move us toward accomplishing our vows, carrying out our vows. So what would you like to say about precepts or vows or ethical behavior or whatever is bubbling for you today? And somebody tell me what time it is, just so we don't run too late. I forgot to put a watch in front of me.
It's 5:02.
Mm-hmm. Pretty good. What would you like to say? Please, Ritoku.
In the ordainment ceremony, the question is posed 3 times. Mm-hmm. Can these precepts be kept? Mm-hmm. And during the ceremony, I'm thinking to myself, well, let's look at number 1 here. don't kill. What did I have for dinner?
Mm-hmm.
And even if I were a vegan, I have an immune system that's killing.
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is killing.
Yep.
So you said the precepts are about reality. The reality is killing.
Mm-hmm.
The precepts don't. And I'm not even going to go through the whole list. But consistent with the theater of the ceremony, I said what I'm scripted to say. I said, yes, they can. 3 times I lied. So right there at the very beginning, I
You've
lied.
broken a precept. Yes.
You know the story in the Lotus Sutra about the man and his children in the house which is burning, and they didn't respond when he said to get out of the house, so the man lied as a matter of skillful means to lure the children out. So right there in the Lotus Sutra, there's an example of lying as a means of skillful means, yet the precepts say don't lie.
Mm-hmm.
You take this as a koan, or you take this as an inconsistency, or how do you approach this?
Sometimes we break a precept as bodhisattvas, knowing that we're going to bear the consequences of that. Right? So it's a offering to other beings. So certainly skillful means is an important part of this thing. And when it comes, for instance, to killing, it's absolutely true because of interdependence. We can't exist on a moment-by-moment basis without killing. We have to eat, we breathe, the body takes care of itself, things happen. We recognize that that's happening, which is why vow and repentance are back-to-back, and they're not separate, because we always know our practice is going to be incomplete. So we can do our very best to watch our motivation and to watch our intention and our aspiration. Am I lying in order to shore up self? Am I lying for self-involved reasons, or am I lying because I'm trying to move the world toward wholesomeness in some way? And I think we have to be a bit careful about that, but that's why this is really tricky. It's not that cut and dried. So in a way, it might be one of the good reasons for turning those precepts around, and instead of saying don't kill, say cultivate, protect, encourage life, because that's something we can actively move toward, recognizing that that practice will always be incomplete. So that's just one of a number of places in our practice where there's this conundrum. Lotus Sutra isn't the only place that shows up. Yeah, it's something we practice with. So we have to make our best effort, recognizing that sometimes we break a precept in order to do something we believe is wholesome in a larger way. So if you see somebody about to hurt a child, you may dive in there and injure that person that's about to hurt that child to save the child. So is that good? Is it wholesome? Is it not wholesome? I don't know. That's why we get on the cushion, right? So we have to recognize those paradoxes in our practice. Life is not that easy. Who else?
I think,
Please.
just sort of responding to that too,
Please.
I don't think that a vow is the same as saying you won't do something.
Right.
It's saying you're intending not to do it. So it's not exactly lying. I think if you break a precept, you can still sincerely have the intention not to kill, but then, through accident of our biology, kill things, and still be holding fast to your intention. So I don't think it rises quite to the level of lying. It's not an oath, and we're not saying we absolutely will not ever kill anything. We're saying we intend not to. So.
Right, and I think there's a difference between a vow and a precept. So a vow is a larger aspiration, and a precept is a guideline. So a precept in its way is not a vow. A precept is a handrail. Here's how we carry out the vow. We try not to kill stuff. We try not to steal stuff. We try not to speak falsehood. But circumstances being what they are, sometimes we break a precept. And then we know as bodhisattvas, we take the hit for that. In whatever way that comes back around. It's something we offer. It's we wear this stuff and we say, open for business. You know, we're here to help as many beings as we can. Certainly in the medieval Buddhist popular literature, there are plenty of stories about Kanon appears, Avalokiteshvara appears when he or she is needed in whatever form is necessary in order to save that being or to, you know, avert disaster or whatever that is. So taking many, many forms. We don't know what form that might take. It might take the form of breaking a precept. That's our challenge. Not so easy.
Well, the vow of saving all sentient beings, that's an easy one, because at the moment of enlightenment, Buddha and all sentient beings became enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
And so all sentient beings already have Buddha nature.
Yes.
Therefore, there's no
They are Buddha nature.
required.
They are Buddha nature. Not they have it, they are it.
That's
Dogen's difference, right? We have to be careful there. I'm sorry, I cut you off at the end. What were you saying?
That was it. It's all done.
That's true. Well, and in that way, yes, it's already, you know, that's already happened. All beings are liberated, and yet all beings are suffering. So, right, what can we do to
Nirvana
ameliorate
and
suffering?
samsara are the same. So there's nowhere to go.
Yeah. Yep. It's all one big reality. Allison and then Tony.
The discussion about sometimes breaking the precepts for a kind of larger good, but being willing to suffer the consequences for doing that. It just reminded me of the story that Hojo-san was discussing in the past few weeks. I think it was from Uchiyama Roshi's farewell address, where he talks about that story of the very strict abbot, and then there's a Tenzo who steals rice or
Stole food to
something.
feed the monks.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, it reminded me of that story.
Yeah.
And it also reminded me of Victor Hugo's novel, Les Miserables,
Mm-hmm.
where near the beginning, there's the hero of this story, Jean Valjean,
Mm-hmm.
and he has some children, and he's very poor, and he steals a loaf of bread, I think,
Mm-hmm.
to feed the children, his children, and he's discovered, and he ends up going to jail. And, so it reminded me of all that.
Mhm.
And you know, you might say, well, the story about the Tenzo taking the rice from the storehouse in this French novel, you know, from a century or more ago, that that's all in the past. It's not relevant to today. But in fact, we have horrible income inequality in our country and in our town.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us, I'm sure, sometimes wonder how we're going to put food on the table.
Yep.
You know? So, I don't know. I think to say there's never any reason to steal is not quite right. There might be a reason.
There might be. Well, there's form and emptiness, right? I mean, there's the larger understanding about how the universe works. And then there's the day-to-day living that says my children need to eat.
Mhm.
And that's the line we walk, right? It's an open question. And there's nobody that can point to one thing or another and say, this is right, this is wrong, this is always like this is always like that, right?
Mhm.
We have to hold both of those things.
Well, it's making me think that perhaps one way that Buddhists could help is to recognize these social problems
Mm-hmm.
that would lead people
Mm-hmm.
to go against the precepts
Mm-hmm.
and try to ameliorate those.
Mhm. Certainly. I also think there's a difference between I'm stealing to feed my children and
Yeah.
I'm stealing because you have a pretty necklace and I want it.
Yep.
You know, that's where we have to look at motivation, I think, and the complexity of any particular circumstance.
Mhm.
Because that kind of stealing a loaf of bread to feed my children is not, I aspire to somehow shore up this idea of self. It's that my children are dying.
Right.
Whereas if I steal your power boat, that's kind of a different thing, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So, of course, there's no right or wrong, but it makes for some interesting Dharma gates, doesn't it? So, yes, could we as practitioners look carefully at our community and say, what are the circumstances that arise that push people to break precepts? And what can we do to help that? That's beneficial action. right? I mean, amen. That would be lovely. Certainly in the national conversation amongst Dharma teachers, there's plenty of talk about that stuff. How do we help? And how do we do that in a skillful way that doesn't just sort of, we're around for a little while and then we're gone, or we perpetuate some problem because we don't deeply understand the problem. I mean, you really have to study the problem, because of course there's so many aspects to any problem. It's not just children are hungry. It's because their parents can't work. It's because, you know, there's no education. It's because their housing is poor, right? I mean, it's just, they're huge problems. But just like our vows, that doesn't mean we do nothing, because it's better to probably do something. So when I first arrived, somebody, maybe it was you, asked me, how activist a Sangha are we going to be? I said, I'm willing to be as activist as you want to be. So if these things are on your minds, and you'd like to think about something, please talk to me, because I'm not unwilling to have that conversation. If this feels like something that's arising for us, I didn't want to do anything right away, because like I have to settle and like listen to the community, and you get to know me, and I get to know you, and we figure out how much labor have we actually got. But if this feels at any point like something that's arising in our practice as a Sangha, and that we really want to take something on and like address it, let's have that conversation. Really. Because if you look at our mission statement as a community, beneficial action is right there. I mean, it's called out, right? So, cool. Let's do it. Somebody else, I think you were wanting to jump in as well.
Yeah, well, kind of an aside, or you're describing it here, but I think a lot of this effort is trying to make, what is it, impermanence, emptiness, and so on, and fit it into our logical, something we can control and move around through words normally. So all this goes on because essentially we're trying to, you know, squeeze reality in a box, little boxes. It's not easy. I think it's necessary to try it, but I remember once Suzuki Roshi mentioned earlier in your talk, you made reference to how reality is, this and that. And he made the remark in terms of this struggle, this difficulty. He said if, I can't remember, unfortunately I can't remember his exact words, but he said something like, if you don't feel like you're dealing with a paradox or a contradiction, then you're not dealing with something real. Mm-hmm. If you're dealing with reality, we are dealing with, like you just described, paradox. It's impossible. We're dealing with the impossible. But he didn't say don't do it, but it's, in a way, it helps to remember that if we tend to judge ourselves as being, we can't succeed, basically, but if the illusion is there that, if I can just, you know, explain this in terms of that, and, you know, this and that, then I can rest. Well, of course,
there's no rest.
But there is a way to rest, but it's not that way.
Right.
So,
right.
That's all.
Right.
Throughout that he said that if it fits everything, then it's not real.
Yeah, well, and of course we want to be comfortable, right? So
Yeah.
we want to fit it into a logical framework that we're used to,
Comfortable.
and we want to be comfortable. I think that's really interesting, this idea that if we're not seeing the paradox, we're not seeing the whole story. That's really helpful, isn't it? I mean, I hadn't thought about that, but I'm going to take that one away. So thank you for that. That's really interesting. If we're not seeing the paradox, there's probably something else happening that we're not paying attention to. Or if we're not seeing another side, there's probably something else happening that we're not paying attention to. That's really helpful. Thank you for that. Who else wants to leap into the fray?
I just wanted to follow up on what Tony was just saying. And you spoke during your talk about being really self-righteous, pardon me, as a trap that one can fall into with, if you think of the precepts as laws or rules. And what Tony was bringing up kind of helps protect us against that mindset, I think.
You want to say a little more about that?
Well, just that if we are trying to be aware of reality, and for instance, we could say, the reality is, here's this precept that you shouldn't steal from other people, that's wrong. And then you can see kind of the paradox that contained within all that, all those issues that surround stealing, that maybe it's not so cut and dried or black and white, that maybe sometimes in life stealing is exactly what you should do, then you won't be self-righteous, you won't condemn people who do steal. You'll
Right.
have some compassion for them and for their circumstances that might have led them to break a precept. At
So
least am I getting close? Maybe not.
So isn't it interesting, we've got two precepts that then kind of have an interesting relationship, because on the one hand we have don't speak ill of others. On the other hand, we have here's a precept. So you break a precept, you see somebody break a precept and your temptation is to say, no.
Right.
Wait a minute. There's this other precept. Now what do I do, right? I mean, these things are not so separate. They all arise together, please.
I was thinking in terms of what Tony mentioned, it seems like, if we don't see the paradox, then we're probably sort of trapped in the world of form and not seeing formlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's like we need to see both sides, and if we only see one side, then it looks very consistent, looks very solid, and it seems like a solid form, but there's also formlessness.
Sure. And I think the opposite is true too, because if we're sort of trapped in the world of emptiness, then we think, well, it doesn't matter what we do. Well, the reality is if I step on your toe, it hurts. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We can't get stuck in one place or the other, and we have to see both. And precepts can look different, please.
So our ability to see is a whole other dimension. Here's a quick example. I asked Marielle, my sweetheart, to do a favor for me on Thursday. She said no. And then on Friday, she comes home from work and she lays back on the couch and says, oh, finally, the weekend. It's so nice to be able to spend some time with you. That's when I get up and I get on my bike and I pedal to go do the errand that she wouldn't do for me. And as I'm pedaling, I said, Greg, is this revenge? And I realized, yeah. So there is a desire to harm that's related to the anger that we had talked about earlier, and that anger had been percolating for about 24 hours, and then it erupts as this kind of behavior. And my sense is that the Dharma practice helps us recognize what's happening, what was previously subconscious, and then becomes something that we can actually see and then do something about. Otherwise, that whole process goes on by itself. I have my action, she has her reaction, and it adds to the yuck.
Yeah, well, I mean, so right there you can see your karma playing out, right? I mean, right there causes and conditions are playing out and perpetuating suffering. And now you're going to go on the bike, so she's not happy, and when you get home, she's going to do something else, and then you're going to do something else, and right?
Yep.
So I think you're absolutely right, that the sitting practice and our general intention to pay attention brings that stuff into the sunlight, because it's when we're ignoring it, suppressing it, distracting ourselves from it, that we get pulled by it. As soon as we see it, maybe we can't stop ourselves this time, but at least we see it, and next time we say, here it is again, now I can, we can gradually begin to take some action. We do that stuff all the time. And look at the suffering. And it can be micro suffering. I mean, I'm sure, you didn't have a big blow up over this thing and break up over it, but I mean, so it's micro suffering, but yet here it is again. And we watch these patterns unfold. Like, oh yeah, wait a minute. So the fact that even though you were already on the bike, you caught yourself and said, wait a minute, is this revenge? Oh, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's a fine example of how we perpetuate that stuff. Please, Risa.
I've had this experience, and I know other people have had this experience, that people who know I'm a Dharma practitioner and they're not, if I do something they don't like, they say, don't you know that Buddhism says you should be X or Y? Wow. And, my husband is a hockey fan, and someone took him to task one time. How can a Buddhist like hockey? It's so violent, So when someone who doesn't practice says something like that, I can somewhat understand it, and I try to explain, well, yes, I'm practicing Buddhism. I'm not perfect yet, but I'm trying to be, But what really troubles me even more is I have this phrase about being bludgeoned with the Dharma, which is when another practitioner takes it upon him or herself to lecture me because I've fallen short. And they say, well, you should just go sit and think about this more, or you should, because you're practicing the Dharma, or don't get upset about it. Don't get upset, just deal with it,
That doesn't help, does it?
No, so my point is, I think, just as you said, we need compassion for someone perhaps who's in dire straits and steals. We also need compassion about the practice and practitioners' shortcomings, and I think it's good to remind a fellow practitioner in some skillful way, that maybe this would be more helpful, or, you're really upset and try this or that, but not this.
Well, I think that's true. We have to be skillful with each other, just like we have to be skillful, with anybody in our lives. And it can be pretty unpleasant to have your Dharma friends kind of standing over you saying, you failed. I mean, that's, I guess we have to ask ourselves, is that really helpful? Just like we would talk to any of our friends, we have to have you consider this, not you should, what. So yeah, I think it can happen in Dharma centers, and I've been part of Dharma centers where there was this in-group and the out-group, and the in-group felt like they could go around doing that kind of thing to everybody else, and you just think that's how you break a Sangha, right? I mean, that's not helpful for anybody. It's simply a reinforcement of this small self, that I can say I'm better than you. I need some way to be better than you, right? So yes, let's please be careful with each other. We're all Dharma teachers on our way. Some of us wear, interesting clothes, but it doesn't matter whether we do that or not. We're all here to help each other. So if somebody gives you direction and that person seems to be skillful and seems to that's an appropriate role, then it's helpful if we can listen. We can take that on board and decide whether or not it's actually useful or helpful or correct, but we can try to listen. Because one of the other things that we do as a Sangha is we help each other grow as leaders. So, if somebody's been on this path a little bit longer than you, one of the ways you can help that person is by helping that person develop leadership skills. And sometimes that person will be skillful, and sometimes that person will not be skillful. I mean, me and everybody, right? So, yes, we need to do things with some skill and some compassion. And it's probably okay if you feel like you've been bludgeoned with the Dharma, maybe not in that moment, but later on, to give some feedback to that person. I know you were trying to help me, but this is what would have been maybe more helpful. I don't know. Let's think about that as we go forward. Somebody else had a hand up. Allison.
Well, I just have
And
a quick question. I think there was one point early on when you were talking about don't disparage the Buddha, the Sangha, and so on. And so about not disparaging the Sangha. Suppose there is a Sangha, I don't think it's ours at this moment, but suppose there is a real problem in a Sangha. A lot of really otherwise wonderful Sanghas have had terrible
Yes, they have.
Me Too
I've known some.
troubles and so on.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me that bringing those problems out into the open is not the same thing as disparaging the
Correct.
Sangha. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Oh gosh, if there's problems, that stuff has to come out into the sunlight. That's the death of a Sangha. To have that stuff bubbling in the underground, oh my word. People leave in droves because where are you more vulnerable in your life than in your spiritual community? We have to be safe here. This has got to be a trusting group. This has to be a safe place where we can come and drop barriers. Because if we can't, we've got real trouble. People go to churches, and I'm using the term loosely, people go to their churches because they figure this is a place that I can really be me and work on my stuff You don't go to your church for additional stress.
Mm.
So if people are coming here and feeling like this is not a safe place, it's not okay for me to be who I am, it's not okay for me to say what I think, oh, you know, somebody sent up a flare, and if I'm the one perpetuating that behavior, you need to go straight to the nearest board member and say she's trouble. Please. Because that's just the death of a sangha. I don't care if the teacher is sleeping with students, I don't care if there's financial mismanagement, I don't care if there's a cliquey in-group, out-group, I don't care if there's bullying going on. If you're seeing behavior that makes you not feel like this is a trusting place, please do something. Please. Right? Ritoku wanted to leap in, I think. I think you had a hand up at one point.
Yeah, well, one of the themes that seems to have come out is what I would call ethical tyranny.
Ethical what?
Ethical tyranny.
Okay.
Sort of the Inquisition way of imposing morality on others without due consideration of just how fallible things are. And I think it was Thoreau who said there's nothing more dangerous in the world than somebody who wants to do good. But I'll tell a real short story here. Back in the days when it was called the Tibetan Cultural Center, and Norbu Rinpoche was still alive, I hung out there pretty often. That was even before this temple began. And most of the volunteers there were women. And they had a Theravada monk who was visiting for some months. One day I drove in, and one of the women came up and said, "Oh, great, I'm happy you're here. We got a problem, you can help us." So what's that? Well, this Theravada monk needs to go to town to do some food shopping. So, okay, well, what's the problem then? Well, we would like you to take it because we can't. And why is that? Well, that he has a precept about not being in a car with a woman. Then I remembered a story of this Anglo-Tibetan Buddhist in California who, after being trained for some time in India, he flew back, and now he's doing all the same precepts, because the Tibetans have all the hundreds of precepts, which is the same precept of you don't get into a car with a woman if you're a man. He arrives at the airport, and lo and behold, it's a woman who's picking him up. So what does he do? He gets in the car. He decides that it would be an inconvenience to the Sangha that made the arrangements to pick him up. So it would be better just to break that Sangha and be compassionate about the situation than to use a kind of an ethical tyranny to impose that rule as if the rule is a law that can never be broken.
Right.
So it seems like the formula for determining such things is really compassion.
Yeah.
It's the most compassionate thing to
Yeah,
do.
exactly.
Sometimes it's far more compassionate not to follow the rules than it is to follow the rules.
Sure, well, those rules aren't absolute. They're guidelines toward us living in a wholesome way. And if the way we live in a wholesome way in this moment is to ignore this guideline, then that's what we do, right? No lightning bolt is going to come and strike us if we break a precept.
Or tools for mindfulness.
Yeah, you know, it's really about, yes, about paying attention. What's the effect we're having on other people? Are we moving skillfully through the world? Absolutely right. I think that's absolutely right. Let's move along to tea, just because otherwise I know I'm highly verbal. I'll stay up here for a long time. Because we can continue to talk about all this stuff at tea time, and we also have the World Peace Ceremony to do. So let's go ahead and maybe move toward that, if people are willing to kind of stop here. Does that seem okay? All right, thank you for a very good discussion this morning.